Welcome to the creepy story for sleep. Get ready to dive into the most terrifying stories you've ever heard. But before we begin, tell me, from which city are you watching this video? Leave it in the comments below, and if you're brave enough to face the terror that's coming, show your support with a. The house I live in is only a couple hundred meters away from a small church in a suburb. Although I was brought up a Christian, I was never truly religious, and I only went to said church whenever my parents took me as a kid. My dad died when I was a teenager, and we stopped going as a family altogether. After that, I only went whenever my friends asked me to tag along. Now, I'm 21, and I only passed by the church whenever I had to go into the city, because there's a dirt road beside it that leads to the parking lot behind, adjacent to a major road where it was easy to get on a bus to work. It was closer than the village gate in the opposite direction, and I only had to ride one bus from there. I am not an easily scared man, nor have I previously experienced lasting trauma after being spooked, and I'm here to tell you that what I saw beside that church 3 months ago still haunts me to my core. A storm was announced to hit earlier that week, but leaving for work that early Thursday morning, the skies were clear, not a single cloud to cover the starry sky. So I didn't bring an umbrella. I climbed over the parking lot gate because it was chained shut until 6 for the first mass. The guard at the outpost didn't mind because the church staff knew my family well. I work at a hotel as a line cook, and it's a very demanding job. I have to leave home before the sunrise, and most days I work long after it has set. The only time I get to see the sun is if I'm assigned to a station at the buffet, where we have a view to the poolside. It was an average, overworked and underpaid kind of day for me. I wasn't assigned at the buffet line. I stayed in the kitchen where there weren't any windows, so I was surprised to see the flooded streets when I clocked out. Apparently it had been raining heavily all afternoon, and it subsided around sunset. It was around 8 in the evening when I left the hotel, and in my country, flooded streets meant standstill traffic for at least a couple of hours. This wasn't that uncommon. I had dealt with similar situations before. It also meant I could sleep on the bus, so it wasn't too upsetting. Fast forward to around midnight, and it's pouring out again. I'm not too far off from the church parking lot, so I decide to get off the bus and start walking because it had not budged for the last 10 minutes. I put my phone and wallet in my waterproof backpack, which also contained a spare shirt, my house key, and my knife set. I didn't mind getting wet. Around this time, the parking lot gate was already chained shut, but I climb over it like I usually do. It was flooded knee-deep in the parking lot, and there was no security guard at the outpost. I figured he retreated into the church. It's dark, but I focus on the small lights from the houses in the distance. They only look like dots from that far. I trudge my way through the open parking lot that could have passed as a kiddie pool when I hear this strange sloshing at the far corner to my left. Due to the heavy rain, I couldn't clearly make out what was there, but I knew that I wasn't alone. All the lights to the lot were shut, and the only things to guide me were the few lights of the houses far ahead and my memory of the area's landscape. It's a straight shot from the dirt road, so I didn't have to worry about a light source. The sound of all the falling raindrops accumulated into dull static noise, so it was easy for me to hear that there was something going on in that corner. I could see the shape of a person who seemed to be sitting down, so I could only see from the waist up. As I got closer and my eyes better adjusted to the dark, I could tell that it was a woman because of her long hair and curvy outline. She was flailing her arms and splashing the water around, grunting as she pounded her fists into the water. She was about 2 cars' length away, so I wasn't too concerned about it. I've dealt with crazy people before. I glanced over a few times as I passed her and then got to the dirt road. Quite unnerving. She was out of my line of sight at this point, and the mud made it hard to walk. Water was only ankle deep, but I kept having to jerk my foot free after each step because my shoes would sink into the mud. A small splash made me look over my shoulder, and in the darkness of that dirt road, the woman was splayed out face first in the shallow water. I froze, thinking whether or not I should help her. I hated the thought of being the guy who let someone drown in water 6 inches deep. She was about 10 steps away from me, and before I could decide what to do, she started to move. It was too dark to see any details, but her outline was distinguishable enough for me to see that she was looking up at me. She slowly got on her hands and feet like she was about to stand, but her hands lingered on the ground, rump in the air. I was already scared pale at this point. My legs didn't work and I thought of reaching for my knives, but I was afraid to move. And then she starts crawling toward me on her hands and feet. This sends a jolt through me and all of a sudden I'm sprinting toward my house. I could hear the splashes behind me along with her coarse breathing, almost like she was coughing. My eyes started filling with tears and the rain against my face made the light in the distant houses blurry, but I knew that at that point I was running for my life. I couldn't tell if she was catching up, but I didn't have it in me to look back. I heard her yell in a voice so rough it resembled a pig's squeal. Short, sharp, and loud, a wordless shout of anger. I believe that was the fastest I ever ran in my life. At this point I couldn't hear anything but the rain, deafening, unrelenting, and violent. My house was close. I sped by a few houses with their dim porch lights and I could tell that I was running on asphalt. I didn't know when it happened, but apparently I lost my shoes back at the dirt road. One last bend and I was at my doorstep. I forcefully tore my backpack zipper open and fumbled around the inside for the key, frantically looking around to see if she was still chasing me. I got in the house, slammed the door shut, and collapsed. I don't recall the rest of that night, but when I woke up the next morning in my bed, my older brother filled me in. He was awake when I got home that night and went to the front door when the noise alerted him. He said I was on my knees, leaning against the door and quietly sobbing to myself. He woke my mom and they were trying to console me, but I wouldn't talk. They tried to ask me questions, but I would just shake my head. They got me into some dry clothes and led me to bed. Over breakfast, I explained what happened and my mom said she'd notify the village guards. I could tell that they were concerned for my safety, but they didn't understand the fear that I felt. My brother even joked about it. I didn't go to work that day. In fact, I took the rest of the week off because I caught a fever. The guards did a minor investigation and even increased patrol for a while, but they didn't find anything but my shoes in the parking lot. When I did get better, I started taking the long walk to the main village gate to work. Going home, I now carpool with a buddy who can get me close enough to home that I don't have to use the dirt road route. Days that he can't drive me, I take a taxi even if it hurts my pocket a bit. I can't walk alone anymore without glancing over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Sudden loud noises make my heart jump. I can't stand the sound of rain. I've been getting better though. I can sleep with the lights off now. I just wish I would stop seeing the crawling woman's shape when I start drifting off to sleep. I wish I could tell you more about her. I honestly do. Because it's one thing to be afraid of something, but when you lack the understanding of what you fear, your mind fills in the blanks with terrifying detail. Sarah Jacobs clutched her umbrella tightly as she trudged through the rain, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. It was the end of her night shift at the diner, and all she wanted was to get home and crawl into bed. But as she walked the familiar route to her apartment, she couldn't shake the creeping sense of dread that seemed to follow her every step. She had tried to call a cab, but her phone had died just as the dispatcher answered. And with Jessica, her roommate and best friend, working a double shift at the hospital, Sarah had no choice but to brave the storm and walk the few blocks home. She had always been a bit of a nervous person, prone to imagining dangers that weren't really there. But tonight, the darkness and the rain seemed to amplify her fears. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight, ready to pounce at any moment. She quickened her pace, eager to get home and lock the door behind her. But as she turned down her street, she realized with a sinking feeling that she had left her keys at the diner. Swearing under her breath, she fumbled for the spare set that Jessica kept hidden under a flower pot by the front door. As she crouched down to retrieve the keys, she heard a noise behind her. She spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street, the rain, and the shadows. She was about to stand up and unlock the door when she saw something move in the corner of her eye. She turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the darkness, its eyes glowing like embers in the night. Sarah screamed and stumbled back, tripping over her own feet and landing hard on the wet pavement. The figure loomed over her, its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. "Who are you?" Sarah managed to gasp out, her voice shaking with fear. But the figure said nothing, only reached out a hand towards her as if to grab her. Sarah screamed again and scrabbled backwards, trying to escape. But it was too late. The figure had her in its grasp, and there was nowhere to run. As the fear built up inside her, Sarah realized with a sense of horror that this was the end. She was going to die on this rainy night, alone and afraid, with no one to save her. But even as the darkness closed in, Sarah refused to give up. She fought with all her might, struggling against the figure's grip with a strength she didn't know she possessed. And in that moment, as the fear reached its climax, Sarah discovered something within herself that she had never known before. A spark of courage, a glimmer of hope. It was enough to give her the strength to break free and run, her feet pounding the pavement as she raced towards safety. She didn't stop until she had reached the door of the apartment, fumbling with the keys as she tried to unlock it. When she finally stumbled inside, she collapsed on the floor, panting and shaking with fear. But even as she lay there, Sarah knew that she had survived. And in that moment, she realized that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. The fear may have built up and up and up, but in the end, Sarah had faced it down and emerged victorious. And as she lay there in the safety of her home, she knew that no matter what dangers the world might hold, she would always find the strength to face them head-on. This happened to me when I was about 13 or 14 years old. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. One of my close friends lived deep into the countryside with their grandmother. The house had been in their family for generations. Their relatives literally built that house on that piece of land. A mile down the road from her home was an old, and I mean old, graveyard. Some of the gravestones were just small, flat square rocks, which could no longer even be read. Unfortunately, a lot of the graves were for children. A few stillborn, and then children under 5 who obviously caught illness and passed. My friends told me there was a few graves hidden in the trees, not allowed to be with the rest of the graveyard. Sure enough, there was a few small broken gravestones with no names mentioned. They told me that they were the slaves of some of the people who lived here in the countryside working on the farms. As they were just slaves, they were disregarded and not cared about / allowed to be buried in the graveyard with the others. It honestly broke my heart. The graveyard was so old that very rarely would it receive visitors. I noticed a bush of flowers growing at the edge of the graveyard and told my friend of an idea I had. We went back to her grandmother's house and pulled a small rusty child's wagon out of the garage. We gathered flowers from the bush and went around, placing them on every grave. I made sure to go back and give some to the people who were excluded from the graveyard. They absolutely deserved to be honored. As we were going through, I heard the wagon suddenly creak. We stopped and looked back at it. The sound was as if someone had climbed inside the wagon and sat down. It wasn't simply the wheels creaking from the wagon being pulled. It was sitting still when it made the noise. I looked down, seeing that we had stopped in front of the grave of a child, and the faded date on the headstone showed he passed at only 5 years old. I thought for a moment, then spoke out loud. "Are you wanting to play in our wagon? You want me to give you a ride? Okay, I'll give you a ride, but only for a little while. Until we reach the gate, okay? You can't follow us out." We finished laying flowers on each grave, and then we reached the end of the graveyard, just as the sun was going down. "Hurry, we need to get back to the house," my friend warned me. "Why?" I asked curiously, seeing her behaving oddly. "I'll tell you when we get back to the house, not here," she whispered to me. At the gate, I felt the presence with us still. "Okay, we have to leave now, I'm sorry. You have to get out of the wagon." I could tell it hadn't left. "I'm sure it's very lonely here, but we can't stay, it's getting dark, we have to go home, we'll come again sometime." My friend gave me a look as if to warn me not to make promises. "I'll try to come play with you again sometime, okay? You cannot leave this place with us." Finally, I heard the wagon creak and you could see it slightly shift. My friend sighed in relief. "Hurry, let's go." Once we were in her grandmother's backyard, I looked back, seeing the cemetery gates from there. I felt watched. "Hurry, let's get inside," she called to me. As her grandmother was cooking dinner, she told me an eerie story that everyone living out there knew. "Don't hang around near that graveyard at night. A little bit past the graveyard, down the hill, there's this ditch. At least 100 years ago, there was a really bad storm. There was a woman and her little baby. They were trying to get out of the rain and find shelter, so she went down to the ditch. Unfortunately, the rain only got worse and she got trapped and couldn't climb out. The rain was too heavy and made it really slippery and muddled. She couldn't crawl out of. Water filled down there, drowning them both. On rainy nights, if you're down there near the ditch or the graveyard, you can sometimes hear the woman and baby crying. All of us kids raised out here know not to be anywhere near there after dark, especially if the weather is bad. We know to stay in our yards if we're outside at night, and to stay close to our houses if we're outside after dark." I felt sadness, accompanied by chills, hearing this story. The next day I was supposed to go home, but my friend begged me to stay one more night. It was the weekend, so my father didn't mind. We made a small bonfire in the yard that night and roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. All of a sudden we heard distant rumbling, thunder. Then we felt the sprinkle of raindrops. Her grandmother opened the door, beckoning us all to get inside so we don't catch a cold. Of course, we all listened, abandoning the small fire and running inside. We watched from the door, waiting for it to be put out by the rain. Don't worry, it was. The rain came down harder and we all gathered in the living room watching TV. The time passed quickly, but the rain hadn't stopped. By 10, her grandmother told us all it was lights out, time to go to the bedrooms and go to bed. We listened and all changed into our pajamas and went to the girls' room, my friend and her sister, who was also my friend. The sound of the rain helped the others fall asleep rather quickly. I couldn't stop thinking of the story I had heard from the day before. I felt a bit scared. I was a kid after all, being out in the countryside in this old house. A house that creaked and shook when it stormed. The wind howled outside and the rain beat down on the roof. The windows were shaking. I shut my eyes tightly, trying to force myself to sleep. Somehow I managed to doze off. But a few short hours later, I was awakened. All those rain sounds made me wake up with the feeling of needing to use the bathroom. I quietly made my way to the bathroom, careful not to wake up anyone. When I got back to my friend's room, I checked the time. Almost 2 a.m. The rain was still coming down strong. It didn't sound like it was letting up anytime soon. I climbed back into bed, trying to go back to sleep. Just as I felt my eyes get heavy again, I heard something. I opened my eyes, looking around the room. I could hear a voice. I thought maybe someone couldn't sleep and decided to watch a movie. Sometimes her grandmother would watch TV for a little while and then go back to bed. I walked out to the living room, but it was dark. The rain was still coming down heavily. I went back to the bedroom, telling myself that I was tired and needed to just go back to sleep. Again, right as I was about to slip into sleep, I heard something again. Crying. A baby crying. I nudged my friends, trying to wake them up. Groggily, one of them half woke up, asking what was wrong. "I hear it," I whispered quietly. I hear the crying." She rubbed her eyes and looked at me in the dark. She let sink in what I said, I guess, and sat there quiet. She put her finger to her lips, telling me to be quiet too. "Go back to sleep," she whispered as quietly as she could, without being completely silent. "Stay in bed, away from the windows. Don't listen." "Can you hear it?" I asked. "If you hear it, pretend you don't. Go back to sleep." It took at least an hour. I'm guessing I didn't check the time again, but I was able to force myself to sleep again. My sleep gave me no safety or comfort. In my dream, I was standing in the road outside their house in the middle of a storm. I could hear a baby crying. It was a loud, agonizing cry of pain. I looked around me in the pitch dark, afraid. I gotta get back to the house, I told myself. I was running through the heavy rain, barely able to see in front of me. I could feel the wet, muddy earth beneath my feet, telling me I was at least back in the yard. My feet felt so heavy, all my clothes weighing me down and my feet sinking into the wet ground. The crying got louder. I turned around and saw a figure in the road. A woman standing there holding something in her arms. She was drenched from the rain. Her skin was a sickly pale shade. I couldn't see her eyes. She was slowly walking towards me, reaching for me with one hand, while still holding what I presumed to be a baby in her other arm. I ran towards the house, grabbing the door and running inside. I locked the door and kicked off my shoes. I heard the crying echoing outside. I ducked down, covering my head. "Go away. Stay away from me." The cries grew louder and I shut my eyes, screaming. When I opened my eyes again, I was in bed. My friends were looking at me. "Good morning, sleepyhead." I looked at my friend, who I remembered waking up last night. "Are you okay?" she asked, confused. "You look sweaty." I think so. I had a bad dream. Maybe I shouldn't have told you the story yesterday." "No, I don't blame you, it's okay. It was just a dream though. Just try to forget about it." I looked to my other friend. "Did you hear it last night?" I whispered. She was giving me a confused stare. "What are you talking about?" "When you woke up and told me to go back to sleep and ignore it." Her confusion didn't leave. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Her sister looked at me, interrupting before I could say something again. "Her? Wake up in the middle of the night?" "Yeah, right. She's a deep sleeper. She can sleep through a bomb." I got quiet, not knowing what to say. I remember her talking to me. "I didn't dream that, right?" Their grandmother called to us from the kitchen, beckoning us to eat breakfast. As we all gathered around the table, the smell of bacon and buttery pancakes making all our stomachs growl eagerly, their grandmother said something that made me lose my appetite. "Who snuck outside into the rain last night? There was water all over my kitchen floor. You guys know the rules, you can't sneak out while I'm asleep." Every time it rains, though only at night, a spiraling wooden staircase appears in my room. The sound of the rainfall against the roof is usually enough to rouse me from my sleep. The drumming against the glass loud and clear. The street light beyond the window casts a wash of shimmering orange light into my room through the gap in the curtains. And this light falls upon the staircase, extending up and through the ceiling into a world of shadow. The first time it happened, I just assumed that I was dreaming, and so I paid it no mind. I simply rolled over and returned to sleep, amused. The sun rose the next morning and cast the night away, and with it the stairs, and I promptly forgot all about them. That is, until a few nights later when they appeared again. Same spot as before, standing silently. I remember staring at it from my bed, trying to comprehend, trying to work out if what I was seeing was actually real. I glanced around the room and realized that the door to my bedroom had vanished, replaced entirely with blank wall, and I ended up just watching the staircase, wide-eyed and terrified. Unsure how to proceed and afraid that something might come down them, I think in the end I just screwed my eyes tight shut and forced myself back to sleep. This is what I did the third and fourth times too. I began to fear rain at night because I knew what it meant. I started obsessing over weather reports. It was not until the staircase's sixth appearance that I found the courage to actually get out of bed and examine it a little closer. I know that there are some people out there who would have raced up that thing on day one, but I'm sorry, I'm just not one of them. I'm not the type of person who just acts. I have to think things through. Everything. I have to think everything through. I have to have all possible outcomes laid out in my head before I can commit to something, no matter how insignificant. I'll get a little confidence boost when I'm able to follow one of my pre-prepared routes all the way to the end, but it's exhausting. And sometimes, quite often in fact, something will happen that I hadn't prepared for. A conversation won't go the way I expected. A phone call fails to follow any of the possible paths I had pre-planned, or a social venture lands less than desirably and I panic. I am reminded that life is chaotic and unfair, and I retreat back into myself a little further. I put things off because of this crippling, self-imposed setback. A pair of dumbbells sit unused and gathering dust in the corner of my room. My college assignments pile up. The university starts automatically knocking marks off your maximum potential grade for every day you fail to hand your assignment and pass the deadline. But for some reason this still just isn't enough to motivate me. I hate myself, and yet I cannot find the will to work as hard as I would like. I stepped a little closer to the staircase. I tapped the edge of its rough and crooked carved banister with a finger as the rain washed down the window. Hard, cold, dark wood. I looked up. The steps of the stairs went round and round, and disappeared up through a hole in my ceiling into a world of shadow. I imagined a terrible, twisted creature clambering suddenly down on all fours, eyes wide and jaw distended, screeching through the dark, and I saw myself trapped in a room with no door and no way out. Heart pounding, I returned hastily into my bed and pleaded for the night's swift passing and the rise of the sun. And sure enough, after a long and torturous night, it rose. My life continued to stagnate. The stairs always became less of a threat in my mind during the day, and I knew I needed to visit the campus library to complete my work. But I could not summon the energy to do so. A few of my friends invited me out one evening, but I declined that too. I knew the topic of conversation would inevitably flow into our studies and our courses and things that we'd been up to, and I couldn't stomach another night of feeling inadequate and pathetic. So I made up some excuse and ignored all the subsequent messages. I was angry when I went to bed that night, angry at myself and the world, and now I find myself being awakened once again by the beat of the rain on the roof. I grit my teeth in frustration and roll onto my side, and sure enough, there they are. The stairs are there. And you know what? This time I decide I'm going up. I've started keeping a baseball bat by the side of my bed, and I grab it now as I clench my jaw and head on over to the stairs. I take a deep breath, squeeze the bat tight, and bring my foot down onto the first step. The wood is cold, but I feel at once a rush of warm air from up above. I lick my teeth and continue my ascent. This is the night. This is the night I find out what lies at the top, for better or for worse. I try to plan and play out a series of potential outcomes and routes in my head, though they all end with me either running back down the stairs as fast as I can, or bashing something into submission with the bat in an adrenaline-fueled frenzy. Adrenaline kicks in, right? That's something that happens? But what if it doesn't? Are you strong enough to fight off whatever may come your way? I shoot a glance over at the dumbbells in the corner of my room, unused, then over to the ashtray on my windowsill. I cough in reflex and bristle with self-hatred. Fuck it. I'm going up. And I do so. Step by step, I ascend, hands shaking as I rise up into the darkness. The sounds of the rain continue, but as I leave my room behind me, I can no longer hear it drum against the glass of my window. Instead, my ears suggest the rain now falls on foliage, leaves and ferns and forest. My eyes adjust quickly, quicker than one would expect, and I find myself surrounded, bizarrely, by jungle plant life, the air suddenly thick with intense humidity, the smell of it strong and rich. I pause and look around. Strange, giant wildflowers quiver subtly in the breezeless wild. The buzzing and whirring of curious insects dance at the edge of my hearing, and I feel myself growing damp. Sweat buds across my skin and rain drips onto my neck and shoulders through gaps in the wooden staircase above me. I strongly consider turning back. I'm way out of my depth here. This is insane. This is impossible. I'm not the man of action. I really haven't thought this through. I should return back to my bed. Back to supposed safety. Like you always do, coward. I feel myself flush. No, not this time. This time I'm gonna keep going. I make my decision and take the next step, and a noise echoes in the distance, far above and away. Silly clank. I wait for it to happen again, but it does not, so I carry on cautiously up the stairs, the bat held high. The level of light around me becomes brighter, and awash in green the first confirm without doubt that I am stood in the midst of an enormous rainforest. Bright and foreign moss covers the banisters of the stairs, vines hang down between the steps, and massive, vibrant flowers are in bloom all around, nestled amongst the dense undergrowth and brush of the jungle. Step after step I climb, afraid but emboldened by my own commitment. The way up and ahead is blocked by huge, heavy leaves. I push through them and break above the canopy of the jungle, then pause for a moment to catch my breath. My mouth falls open in shock as I do so. The stairs have ceased spiraling, and instead stretch out like a path ahead of me, tucked into the side of a lush green mountain, and rising at only a very steady incline. To my left the tops of the trees fall away below, out and over an immense and forested valley, before eventually rising back up over more mountains in the far distance. The rain pelts steadily into the horizon from gently churning blue-gray clouds, broken through here and there with rays of glittering light. I am overcome momentarily with a sudden sense of destabilization, of dizziness. I grimace and put a hand to my throbbing temple as I weigh my options. Once again I consider heading back. I wonder if the staircase might inexplicably vanish in the manner it had appeared, if it would dissolve from beneath my feet and I would tumble down through the trees and crash into the rough, wet earth below, trapped forever in this strange land. But the stairs never just disappear. They never vanish before my eyes. They simply cease to be once I've fallen asleep. They are gone by morning, but I've never been aware of a hugely specific time limit, so to speak. As long as I don't waste my time, as long as I stay awake, I should be okay. I'm rationalizing, I know it. Trying to come up with excuses not to turn back. It's scary, but I've made a commitment. I want to see this through. If I go back down and the stairs never reappear, then I'll never know, will I? I'll never know what lay at the top, and I'll have to live with my choice for the rest of my life. So I continue on along my way. The boards of the stairs-turned walkway creak beneath my feet. I hear around me the calls of strange birds and unknown creatures. I wipe the sweat from my forehead as I push through a row of sticky, hanging vines, thankful to be sheltered again from the rain by a new canopy of greenery overhead. A colorful frog jumps from the wet slick boardwalk and into the brush as I pass it by. The wooden walkway follows around the edge of the mountain, then turns to amble deeper into its jungle. I stop for a rest, stretching the muscles in my legs, my mouth uncomfortable and dry. I collect a small amount of trickling rainwater from the plants above in my hands and drink it down, the cool liquid a welcome taste. But the sound of a creaking board of wood has me splutter at once in despair, and I swivel on the spot to look behind me back the way I came. There is nothing there. Just the trickle of the rainwater through the leaves, and the shadows of the trees and ferns, shifting and shimmering ever so subtly. I hasten onwards, my pace slightly increased. I pass by towering trees, the trunks of which have been carved into terrifying shapes. Coiled snakes with heads like human skulls. Strange apes, snarling with wooden teeth, their arms ending in handless stumps crossed against their chests. Eyeless parrots, their wings poised and tensed as if ready to take flight. Stairs are made to be climbed, I muttered to myself over and over. They appeared for a reason. If this world wanted to harm me, they would have just sent something down into my room. I'm supposed to be here. I repeat this several times. I'm okay. I'm supposed to be here. I climb and climb, following along the railed wooden walkway. Up some more steps, and I am faced at its eventual end with a wall of leaves and vines. This is it, I realize. The final opportunity to turn back. Last chance. But if I turn back now, then I will walk with guilt and shame and frustration. And if the stairs never reappear, then I will carry those feelings with me for the rest of my life. So I take a deep breath of hot, humid rainforest air and push through. Silly clank. The noise is loud and reverberates through my surroundings as I make my way out onto the other side. I find myself standing at the edge of an enormous wooden temple. A small waterfall rumbles down the rock at the far side of the wide hall, and all around me are arches and flittering fireflies, glowing gold in the green gloom. Looking up, above the wooden arches, the walls of the temple extend high up into the sky with the trees, to the extent that I cannot see the top. And there's movement, all around. Long, creaking, and ever-changing narrow wooden bridges grind from place to place. Carved gears turn as they splash water onto the boarded floor from up above, and wooden discs that must be at least half my height drop down through gaps. They roll through constantly shifting platforms and changing walls and barriers, and over and across the bridges as they are carried various routes around the temple. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The CLA clank noise, I realize, is the sound of the bridges suddenly moving, clattering with its adjacent gear as it directs the flow of the discs down a new path. Stay calm, Devon, I tell myself as I walk through the central hall, my footsteps heavy on the wet planks below. Stay calm. I make my way towards the little waterfall at the far side. I take in the unsettling carved wooden statues around the base of the pillars and the arches, and I realize they are all of me. I swallow, my mouth again dry. Some of my carved copies watch me pass in silence. Some of them have their heads in their hands. Some are turned to look over their shoulders as if checking back the way they came. None of the statues look happy, and there is one of these idols that differs from the rest. It becomes clear as I approach the waterfall, sat cross-legged between two flowering vines in the form of a carved old man. Moss creeps up his sides and his chest. The wood has darkened with age and with water, and atop his neck is a head that is split into two faces, one facing to the left and one facing to the right. The face to the left has a beard that is carved to hang straight down, whilst the beard of the other is curled up and around his jaw. Neither face has any eyes, and the statue moves. Devon, say the faces together in a joint voice like the splitting of a log. I stagger back in alarm, crashing down onto the rain-soaked floor with a cry, barely aware of the pain throbbing in waves through my elbows as I stare in horror at the unnatural idol before me. I am surprised to see you here, says the face with the curled beard, the face on the right. His head cracks around so that we are facing each other. An irregularity, to be sure. The head cracks round to the left, and the face with the pointed beard speaks in turn. Well, do you have anything to say? I stammer in disbelief, in shock, shaking on the ground as the bridges shift softly overhead. The left face sneers. You have always disgusted me, Devon. You are weak. If you have nothing to say, then begone. I rise to a shaking stand and respond. I am not weak. Zilly clank. A bridge on a lower level than the others grinds and shifts. I glance up to watch it connect to a new segment of wall, and a series of discs go rolling across it towards their new destination. The statue's head cracks to the right. Your first chosen words were a statement in place of a question. I'm impressed, it says. Perhaps your little journey here has done something for your constitution. Perhaps, I reply cautiously, heart pounding. Perhaps you'd like to tell me where my little journey has led me exactly. Zilly clank. The mouth of the face on the right stretches into a grin, with the sound of a branch being torn from a tree. Clever, he says, avoiding another question. But you did so as a reaction, an act of deference to me. Think for yourself. I swallow. Well, I've presumed you to be the power in this realm, I reply, running a tongue over my dry lips, and it makes sense to follow the cues of the authority when in unfamiliar territory. Zilly clank. Interesting, the face replies. I wonder how well your presumptions have carried you thus far. Its head cracks around to the left before I am able to respond. What is it that you want, boy? The face asks. Speak now and speak well, or I will cast you out. I grimace and take a slow, calming breath, holding back my fear. I cannot allow myself to break in front of this idol. I can't explain it, but I know that I just can't let that happen. What is this place? And why did you summon me here? Zilly clank. The faces laugh together. Summon? The left replies. Such arrogance. You think I'd bother to summon you here deliberately? An agentless worm such as yourself? One with a will free, in name only, withered and saddened beyond recognition. The face snaps around to the right. If I had summoned you here, Devon, you would not have come. Decision-making is not a strength of yours. You avoid. I stand tall, defiant. But I did. I did come, didn't I? Or do I not stand before you in this very moment? Zilly clank. A bridge pulls out from the wall and slides round at a right angle directly above the statue's head, and a collection of discs roll down along their new path and into the opposite wall above. You haven't answered my question, I tell them. A pause, and then, you stand in the temple of process. Your temple of process, to be quite specific, says the face on the right. Probability and chance and choice are all weighed here together, and the outcomes play through down below. The columns and the great walls represent varying aspects of your being. I don't understand, I reply, glancing up at the subtly shifting wooden walls, nestled amongst the rainforest canopy above. Of course you don't understand, says the face on the left as the head cracks round. You barely exist at all. It surprises me not that your mind is as dulled as your potential for displacement. What ripples do you create in the water, boy? The statue speaks in riddles. I feel like I can only grasp the gist of what it's saying. I gesture to a column up to my left. Narrow yet deep, filled with an array of platforms, stacked full to the brim with wooden discs. It extends high up into the trees. And what does that one represent? The head cracks round to the right. The column there in this branch of the temple shows to me a critical component in the matrix of your health. It shows to me the likelihood of one of your cells mutating into a poison. A cancer of the flesh within the next 7 cycles of the moon. I stare up at the column in horror. Cancer? Silly clank. Multiple bridges suddenly shift and swivel out from the sides of the column, extending out to meet bridges on the other side of the hall. A cascade of discs falls from the newly shifting platforms, and they roll out and across these bridges to their new destinations. What just happened? I ask the statue. Why is the column changing? You just gave up smoking, it replies simply. What? What do you mean? How could I have just given up smoking? How could you know that? 4 questions in one, the face to the right replies sadly, and his head cracks around to the left. It is a truth. A decision was made. Former outcomes have sealed themselves off and new outcomes have opened. Is this how you wish to spend your time here? As a gaping fish, blubbering over the simplest of concepts. And what if I change my mind? I retort, bristling with existential fear. Just to spite you, let's say I smoke a dozen cigarettes upon my return to my room. The angle of the bridges above me change slightly, enough to slow the descent of the discs. They creak and groan and drip. Then that will be an exercise of will, the face replies. And Janice knows you need it. I stare up at the creaking bridges for a moment in thought, then watch as they return to their angles, and the discs continue their descent to their new locations, rolling noisily through the temple. Holy shit. The implications of a place such as this. I am unable to keep myself from playing my entire life out through my head, weighing on all my past choices and decisions, mistakes and triumphs, few as they are, all swirling, crashing and melting against and into each other. The statue rises to his feet. The motion is horrific. I'd only just gotten used to its faces, and now it stands as an ancient wooden monstrosity, and I can feel a sensation of sickening vertigo twist and tilt my now fragile hold on reality. Get a hold of yourself, boy, the face on the left shouts at me as bridges begin to shift with rapidity, shaking the foundations of the temple as they do so. You don't belong here, says the face on the right. Return to your life. Go on as you were. Allow me to return to my peace. How much have I missed? I choke out. How many outcomes have I closed off? How many for good? The statue clenches its fists as splinters rain down around us. The ground shakes. You wait for a coming change. A great fix, says the face on the right, its tone deep and solemn. You wait and you wait for external forces to push you in one direction or another. The head cracks round to the left. But you fail to see that there will be no great change. The external forces rush by like a wind over the rocks as the cells of your life and your energy mutate. 1 by 1 inch, the head shifts, and both voices speak together. Nothing will come of nothing. The ground shakes. Get him out, the voices roar, and I spin to see my copies, the statues of myself around the temple, stagger awkwardly from their podiums, stumbling towards me with viciousness, arms outstretched. No. No. I shout, I cannot allow these things to control me. I am the master of my own destiny. I have to be. And I haul the bat up high in tensed and shaking hands, and bring it round in a wide arc, smashing it into the side of the closest copy's head with a deep and echoing crack, one which splinters the wood and sends the statue reeling to the floor with a series of loud thuds. I bring the bat up high and heave it down as hard as I can onto the splintered head. It shatters in a shower of brown and green. I bring the bat round again, I swivel and smack it with grunts of deliberate force into statue after statue, sending them all sprawling to the ground. I back away as I do so, retreating to the temple's entrance and the gate of vines. I hold the bat up high and call out to the idol of the two-faced man. I'm going all right. I'm going. But on my terms, not on yours. The decision is mine and mine alone. The statue opens both his mouths, makes to speak again, but I choose not to stay and listen. Instead I turn and run from the approaching statues, sprinting back across the boardwalk through the forest and the rain. I slip and I stumble, but I do not slow. Lightning crackles through the sky in the distance, but I pay it no mind. I hurtle back down along the wooden path and around the edge of the mountainside, and I can feel the wood beneath me start to creak. I put my hand on a rail for support and it breaks clean off, falling down into the jungle below. Oh no, oh fuck, am I too late? Was I gone too long? The creaks grow into a series of cracks. A loud, rotting, tearing, the wood gives way. The planks beneath my feet start to break off and fall through the leaves. Please, I mutter, then louder, please, just a little longer, a little bit longer. I can see the top of the spiraling staircase. I'm so close, but not close enough. Just as I grab the rail, the entire apparatus collapses. It falls with the rain down through the twisted trees and leaves. I try to grab a hold of something, of anything, but it's too wet. I can't get a grip. The vines, they aren't slowing me enough. I can't keep my grip. Oh fuck. This is the end. I squeeze my eyes tight shut in panic, calling out for help, for something, for anything. And the air that rushes past my face suddenly cools. The humidity is left in a cloud behind me, and I slam down hard and land on the carpet of my room, sending an almighty shudder through the floor and the walls. Oh God, I groan, oh Christ. A moment later my room door is thrown open. Two of my housemates stand in shock, clearly just roused from sleep, and they stare at me as I lay soaked through and bruised amidst a pile of rotted wood. What the fuck, Devin? Are you okay, man? What the hell was that? I stare at them in confusion for a second or two, gathering my bearings, and then I wince as I turn to look behind me. The stairs are gone. The sun has begun its rise and the rain is letting up. It patters gently against the glass of my window, and I laugh. I stagger to my feet, kicking away the wood, and nearly falling if not for my housemates jumping forward to help me balance. I thank them and stumble to my chest of drawers, throwing a change of clothes into my college bag. Devin, they ask me as I hastily pull on my shoes, what are you doing? Where the hell are you going? It's 5 a.m. I clench my jaw and massage my wrists, before hoisting the bag onto my back and pushing past them towards the front door. You know what? I reply with a wave. I'm going to go to the fucking library, and then I think to the gym. My father only hit me one time. Open palm across my jaw when I was 7. Once in my life. Been 40 years, but I can still feel it. The sound of the slap, the sting, and the shock. I'm sitting now right where it happened. At the window halfway up the stairs of my childhood home. Remembering the look on his face as he struck me. For years I thought that expression was anger. I was about as wrong as you can get. I'm alone in the house. Sat here on the steps, a drink in hand. Through the dirty old glass I can see the night falling, creeping over the fields, bringing the stars and the cold. The quiet here reminds me of being a boy. My brother's not long gone. He had a lot to say tonight, which ain't like him. Left me with a lot to think about. Unexpected truth can do that. So here I am, looking through my memories with fresh eyes. Every family got a strange habit or two they think is normal, all thinking nothing of it until they grow up and realize it was out of the ordinary. For us, my sisters and brother and I, it was the rain. Whenever it came down, we all had to get inside and sit in the living room together. Every time, no exceptions. Mom and the 4 kids. My father locked all the doors, not a word spoken, then stood at the kitchen window staring out. Always watching the same spot too, a fenced-off field to the north, maybe 500 yards from the house. Most of the time, few minutes would pass, he would sigh and say, "All right." Then we could all go back about our business as if nothing had happened. Sometimes though, once or twice a year if I'm remembering right, he would pull the shutter down, double-check all the doors were locked and then come sit with us in silence till the rain went off. We all talked and played and whatever else, but he never said a word. Just listened. I think I was 4, maybe 5 years old when I realized not every family done this. We were all out in town when it got to raining and everyone just continued on as if nothing had happened. I remember how confused I was, waiting at the doors to the nearest shop in a near panic. My mother, leaning down to whisper so Noon would hear, said, "That's only for at home, honey, okay?" We lived on what had once been a farm, one of the biggest in the county. My grandparents on my father's side had owned it since they married. Never could find out who they bought it from. The land was and still is incredibly fertile. That's how my family made its money, 50 years of selling livestock and produce at a rate you wouldn't believe. My father left home when he was 16, just like his 3 brothers. He had college paid for and plenty of money to get him started in life. But, as he told me many times, a head start don't guarantee a win. He met my mother, fell in love, dropped out of school and whittled away his savings trying to find what he wanted to do with his life. When the time came and my grandparents passed, my mother and father were broke and out of work. They had been left the land in the will. In truth, it wasn't much of a farm anymore. My grandparents had tired of the work when they didn't need the money and let the land go wild. I knew my father hadn't wanted to move back. He muttered it under his breath enough times. It had always seemed crazy to me, but in the end they didn't have no choice. It was in the will that the house and land wasn't to be sold, not in any circumstance. So my parents moved in. They had been desperate for children for years, especially my mother, without any luck. Then within a month of moving to the farm, she fell pregnant with my brother John. And that was that. They took to looking after the land, making a living off of selling the fruit and vegetables that were still growing there. Then a new child every year. I was the last. John, Susie, Sylvia, and me, Austin. It was late November, few days before my 8th birthday when it happened. Storm had come in overnight from the east, clouds so thick the sky was still black as night for sunrise. That rain coming down was so loud you could hardly hear yourself speak. Wind felt like it was moving the house. My father had pulled down the shutters and come in to sit with us all, looking as tired as I had ever seen him. I remember it was awful warm in the house. I was sat in my mother's lap and we had both dozed off. My brother was drawing with that colored pencil set he loved, the girls playing some board game I've forgotten the name of. I woke because I needed to go to the toilet. I slipped down off my mother's knee and saw my father had also fallen asleep. First and only time it happened. I didn't want to wake them. I knew it was wrong, that I shouldn't leave the room on my own, but I don't know. Why do little children do the things they do? I crept out, no one even raised their heads. I felt it when I reached the stairs. I've tried to describe it before, but I can't find the words. Something cold and heavy, pulling at me from out in the rain. It seemed to flood in through the window, an invisible wave, reaching, searching, calling. Just a feeling. I walked to the window. In the memory, the world seems very far away, like I was walking in a dream. I looked out through the glass, through the sheets of rain across the darkened fields. There was something out there in the shadows of the clouds. It saw me. Then my father hit me. I didn't wake for almost a day. My mom was holding my hand, clear from her face she had been crying. It wasn't like waking from a regular sleep, I remember that. Everything seemed darker somehow. Things held in my hands still felt far away, voices came to me as if through water. Hard to explain it. My father apologized. Sat down with just the two of us and said he was sorry about hitting me, but he had no choice and I was never to do that again. I had to understand, to swear to him, when it rained in those fields I wasn't to leave the living room. I promised. For weeks after I would wake in the night, shaking and screaming. When my sisters asked me what I had dreamt about, I could never tell them. In all honesty, I didn't know. All that was left was that call, that pulling inside, and the feeling of being watched. My brother took a turn to sit with me one night until I could get back to sleep. I remember him asking me, "Why did you do it, Austin?" "I had to pee, John." "No, not that. The window. Why were you opening the window?" The next year was when we lost my mother. My sisters and I were away north, spending the week with our Aunt Amelia and her kids. My brother had stayed with our parents to work on the farm. Neither him or my father would ever talk about what happened, not clearly anyhow. There had been a terrible storm, lasting from dawn till dusk. They had been sitting together, waiting it out, when the wind picked up worse than ever. The old oak next to the house came down, caught the house on the way, tearing the wall and putting in the living room window. The rain washed in across my mother and she vanished. I sat in that room for hours when we got home, just staring. On the marks the water had left on the wooden floor. At the rotted trunk and ruins of the tree. We never saw her again. Those few months after were the worst of my life. The aftermath of it all. The police forever at the house, questioning us all. My father drinking seemed like more and more every day. My sisters crying, my brother becoming quiet and distant. I didn't handle it well, of course, not any of it. I had this memory of her sitting with me, stuck in a loop in my head. We would have conversations in my imagination. I would daydream into them over and over. Then snap awake back to the reality around me and realize she was still gone. I started waking in the night crying again, but now no one came to sit with me. They had their own nightmares. About 6 months had passed. I was out working on the fences with my father, right at the edge of our property. It was a beautiful day, little too hot if anything, barely a breeze. We had been out for hours when he stood up sharp and turned to the horizon. "Austin in the car now." It was the first words he had spoken all day. I recognized that look on his face, the tone of his voice. Weather was turning. To this day I haven't seen anything like it. A freak event, once in a lifetime for a storm to move that fast. The wind first, cold and sudden. You hear the thunder, distant but closing, and the sky starts to darken. My father was driving too fast, especially over the dirt roads we had out there. I could hear him muttering under his breath as he drove. "They'll know. Not to leave the house. Even if I'm not there. Your sisters and brother will know." We hammered over boulders and across ditches, old car shaking so much I near fell out the seat. I remember seeing a drop of rain on the windscreen. "You've got better sight than me, boy," he said, eyes still on the road. "The field to the north of the house, you know the one." "What do you see?" I stared out where he asked. "Nothing. But what?" "Someone's opened the gate." Christ. He slammed on the brakes. I felt the car fishtail, seatbelt cut into my neck and choked the breath out of me. My father had gone deathly white. He pulled off his coat and threw it over my head, plunging me into darkness. "Get down, don't move." He pressed it over me, pushing me down into the seat. There was a tremor in his voice I had never heard before. "Don't look, Austin. No matter what you hear, boy, don't look. And don't make a sound." His hand was so tight on the back of my neck it hurt even through the jacket. I could hear the rain now on the roof and the glass. The wind shook the car. Then I felt it. That weight, that cold pull from out in the storm. Something started to scrape slow down the side of the car. Something sharp. That sound. My father shifted position, pulled something from the back seat, and I heard a snap I recognized. He had reached for his shotgun, then checked it was loaded. The sound drew closer, louder. At the back door now. The howl of the metal through the rain and wind coming towards us. It stopped. Right by my door. No sound but the rain and our breathing. Tap, tap, tap. On the glass just inches from me. I heard my father cock the shotgun. Tap, tap, tap. He took his hand from my back and shifted, I guess to get a better hold on the barrel. Tap, tap. A lighter scratching on the glass, something sliding down, then the rattle of the handle. I was soaked in an icy sweat, unable to move, barely able to breathe. Then it stopped. The rain faded out in a few seconds, even faster than it had come. I could hear my father crying. He died a few years later. John and Susie had gone off to college, just me and Sylvie left. He had been drinking heavier, hell of a lot heavier. Took to reading my mother's diary, listening to old music. Couldn't talk to him about it, Christ almighty, we tried. It was raining heavy one morning, my sister and I were in the living room and we both fell asleep to the sound. He just got up and walked out into it with his shotgun. The sound of it firing woke us. Heard him shout, "Fire again." I'll never forget my sister's face, eyes so wide as we stared at each other across that room. The rain had stopped by the time we got to the door. There was nothing there but the weapon lying in the wet grass. He was gone. So here I am decades later. Feels strange to even say that, you know? How can it be so long? My brother called me here this morning, told me this story again from his side. The truth of it, or as much as he got from Dad. The family had always known about what came with the rain. They never gave it a name, never talked about the details of what they saw. Came with the land like a deal you signed up to by living here. Who knows when it began? What it really was? Sometimes it came, sometimes it didn't. If the rain didn't touch you, it was no problem. Used to be worth it for how fertile the land was. But not something you could live with forever. When kids got old enough, they were told the truth, made to swear to never sell the land, and to stick to the deal. Through tears he told me about seeing our mother taken. Windows smashed, rain washed in across her and she was gone, he said. It took her, Austin. John says he's leaving the country, can't take the weight of this place anymore. I don't blame him. Can't say I don't understand. He's left it all to me to do with as I please. My sisters aren't interested, don't even live in the country no more. Not how I expected today to end, I'll tell you that. Here I am, leaning against the cold glass, too much to drink and too much to think about. In a good mix, I know. I'm remembering my mother. Snatched away from us like smoke in the wind. Remembering that open gate, blurred by rain. That tapping on the glass of the car window. Decades later and I can still feel it, you know, watching me. There's a storm coming. Dreams have affected me so severely throughout my life that my parents took me to a therapist when I was 8 years old. Her name was Dr. Magger. She specialized in dream therapy. I had many sessions with her during my youth and continued to see her up to my late teens. I stopped seeing her altogether when I moved away for college, but by that point I could somewhat rationalize my dreams. I'm Ethan, by the way, 28 years old, from Maine. I grew up in Bar Harbor and now reside not a million miles away in Portland, Maine with my girlfriend Kat. I experienced something terrifying recently and have not been able to relax since. It started on a Friday, the day Kat was leaving to visit family in Pennsylvania for the weekend. "Fuck," she yelled from the hallway of our apartment. I came running to investigate. "Are you all right?" She was standing on one foot, wincing. "Yeah, I just dropped the suitcase on my foot. Son of a Binks." I froze on the spot for a moment. Why would you say that? One of my recurring childhood dreams featured a character called Mr. Binks. I told Kat about him in the past, but it was a name I hadn't heard or spoke of for years. "Say what?" she asked, confused. "You know how much he traumatized me." "Ethan, who are you talking about?" After arguing about it briefly, she assured me that she'd said, "son of a bitch." I'd misheard her. "I'd never make light of your dreams, Ethan." Kat had witnessed how my dreams affected me at times. I'd scared her myself once or twice. I gave her a hug. "I'm sorry, Kat." "Are you okay?" she asked. "Now you got me feeling like I should stay." No, I said. "Don't be silly. You go. Plus it's too late to cancel the orgy." She slapped my arm playfully. "We both know you'll be playing video games in your underwear the whole weekend." I shrugged. "Well, when the cat's away." After we said our goodbyes, I grabbed a load of snacks and powered on the PlayStation for a few hours. Dinner consisted of takeout chow mein, cherry Garcia, and a few Coronas. I can look after myself, but a weekend without judgment is sometimes required. I woke up late. My neck ached from the position I dozed off in, so I stretched a little. Some badly acted drama was on the TV. I picked up the remote and yawned, starting to flick through the channels with the intention of switching it off and heading to bed. That's when I found it. Night Terrors Live. There was a studio audience applauding as the words filled the screen. It wasn't the usual upbeat music you associate with talk shows. It was eerie and sinister, like a horror movie score. There were thunderstorm sound effects and the studio lights flickered. Then the camera focused on a stage as someone appeared to loud cheers and whistles. It was Dr. Magger. My jaw dropped along with the remote. It had been around 10 years since I'd seen her, but she looked exactly the same. She was wearing a tailored navy pantsuit and her jet black hair was cut into a blunt bob. "What the hell?" I whispered as she spoke. "Good evening and welcome to Night Terrors Live. I'm Dr. Magger. I've been studying and analyzing dreams for more than 30 years and have been a dream therapist for the last 20. My patients have ranged from small children to the elderly, from stay-at-home parents to Fortune 500 CEOs. They all have at least one thing in common: nightmares. Nightmares have no preference or prejudice. They don't care if you're good or bad, rich or poor. We've all had them, but some have exceptionally horrifying nightmares that leave mental scars. That's where I offer my expertise. Tonight, we're going to talk to some of the most interesting and terrifying beings to inhabit the dreams of my patients. The audience erupted into applause as I sat in disbelief. "This can't be real," I said to myself, using a few dream tests I'd learned over the years. One of the methods is to try and read or look at something familiar. If it looks nonsensical or warped, you're likely dreaming. I picked up my phone and was instantly greeted by the time, date, and name of my service provider. I scrolled through WhatsApp and read clear messages from friends and family. As Dr. Magger continued to talk, I called Kat. It went to voicemail after a few rings, but I couldn't hold that against her. It was past midnight. I tried again anyway. When it went to voicemail, I left a "please call me back" message in the most rational tone I could muster. Then I sank further into the couch as I couldn't help but watch. Dr. Magger went behind a desk, the kind you'd see on other talk shows. The backdrop was a deep red, like a western sunset, with Night Terrors Live in bold black lettering. Later in the show, we'll be talking to a terror straight from your dark basement and the ghoulish projection of a murdered wife who drove her husband to suicide. But first, please give a warm welcome to the always charming and deceptive Mr. Binks. My heart felt like it stopped beating for a moment, then it threatened to break my ribcage. I screamed out loud as a man walked on set waving to the cheering audience. He wore his signature white shirt and green argyle sweater vest, beige pants, and brown shoes. His face was clean-shaven and his dark hair was short and neat. He had a friendly and approachable appearance, like your childhood best friend's dad or a cheerful school teacher. "Thank you," he said as he sat with one leg crossed over, flashing his pearly whites. "You inhabited the dreams of little Ethan," said Dr. Magger. "He was a patient of mine for several years." "That's right. I believe it was over a period of just over 3 years." I tried to call Kat again. "Please pick up, please pick up." It kept going to voicemail. The room was spinning as Mr. Binks chatted away and smiled with his phony nice guy act. "No offense, but you look like the friendly guy next door," said Dr. Magger. "Not the monster in the closet." "That's the beauty of it," he said. "The element of surprise. I appeared as someone Ethan could trust. It made his inevitable realization more rewarding, for me at least." "We have a clip of you in action," she said. "Let's take a look." Before long, a clip had started to play on the backdrop, one I was all too familiar with. Despite wanting to run, I couldn't look away from the screen. It was like looking through my eyes as a child, with a hazy dreamlike quality. I was on a playground swing, moving back and forth as a figure in the distance waved. I could make out Mr. Binks's vest. "Ethan," he called. "I've lost Grover. Can you help me look for him?" Like with most dreams, all the background information was already known. He was a friend, and I knew that Grover was his dog. "Sure thing, Mr. Binks," I said, jumping from the swing. "Thanks, Ethan," he said. "I think he went into those trees over there." When he pointed, I could see Grover's leash in his hand. I could hear barking coming from the direction of a woodland area. "I heard Grover," I said excitedly, running to the trees. "Wait for me," said Mr. Binks from behind. "It might not be safe." I entered the woods. It was relatively bright, the sun beaming through treetops. Barking echoed from somewhere nearby. "This way, Mr. Binks," I said, heading in that direction. "Stay close, Ethan," he said. As we walked further into the woods, it became darker, and I began to feel a little scared. More barking could be heard. "Grover," I called out. "Mr. Binks, he's over." When I turned around, I was alone. I started to panic and spun on the spot, looking in all directions. "Mr. Binks," I yelled. As the woods became darker still, I remember the chill I felt through my body, like the temperature had dropped significantly. I kept calling for Mr. Binks, feeling like I was lost until I spotted his vest nearby. He was waving. "Ethan, I found him." I sighed with relief and approached him. He stood motionless, a smile fixed to his lips as he stared at me. "Where's Grover?" I asked. "You silly boy," he said, shaking his head. "I don't have a dog." Before I could run, he wrapped the leash around my neck and pulled tight from both sides. He gritted his teeth as his fists started to shake from force. I sat up and grabbed my neck as I took exaggerated breaths, years of childhood trauma flashing before me. It would always be a scenario where he tricked me into helping him or promised some kind of adventure. They would always end the same though, with him violently murdering me. "Those were a good few years," said Mr. Binks as it focused back on the studio. "Ethan made some progress," said Dr. Magger, "and was finally able to evict you from his dreams, as it were." "I blame you for that," said Mr. Binks to laughter from the audience. Dr. Magger grinned awkwardly and shrugged. "Sorry, it's what I do." It's fine. I do still think about Ethan though. I often wonder if he still thinks about me." My whole body shivered. "Why not ask him yourself?" said Dr. Magger. Mr. Binks turned to look directly at the camera. I froze. "Do you miss me, Ethan?" I fumbled with the remote as I attempted to power off the TV. He flashed a smile. "I sure do miss you." The power cut off and I ran to the bedroom, throwing on some sweatpants and a hoodie. I couldn't be in the apartment alone. I drove for around 3 hours to Bar Harbor, my nerves on edge the whole journey. It was still dark in the early hours when I arrived at the house I grew up in. My parents always kept the key under a garden ornament, so I let myself in, trying to be as quiet as possible. When I was inside, I collapsed against the door and put my face in my hands. After a few minutes, I could hear movement and muffled voices from upstairs. Then Dad shouted down, "I've called the police." "Dad, it's me," I yelled out. "Ethan?" He started walking down the stairs with a baseball bat in his hand. Then I heard Mom call out, "Is it Ethan?" "Yes, honey," said Dad. False alarm. She came bounding down the stairs. "What's wrong, Ethan?" I stood up and hugged her as I cried. "I think I'm losing my mind." We sat around the dinner table drinking peppermint tea as I told them about the show. "You were dreaming, son," said Dad. "It was just a horrible dream like the ones you had when you were a kid." "I swear it wasn't a dream," I said. Mom held my hand. "Let's get you to bed, some rest will do you good. We can talk in the morning. Your room is still made up." "I'm not sleeping in there," I yelled. My old bedroom was not a safe space for me. It held terrible memories. "Okay, sweetheart, I'll make up the couch." I was reluctant to fall asleep that night, but my body wouldn't let me stay awake. I was exhausted. As feared, I began to dream. I was on the back seat in Kat's car as she drove on a rainy night. She was singing along with the radio. I tried to talk to her, but no words came out. It was like I wasn't really there, only observing. A figure was illuminated in the headlights standing on the side of the road. Even before I saw the flash of green argyle, I knew who it was. Don't stop, Cat. I tried to scream. It was useless. She pulled over and he climbed into the passenger seat. Thank you, kind stranger, he said. My goodness, you're soaked, she said. I'll dry off soon enough, he said. She carried on driving as I watched helplessly. Where are you heading? She asked. Not far at all, really, just a little further down this road. You'll see the lights. Got it? You're very kind, miss, he said. Picking up strangers isn't recommended. With that, he turned and winked directly at me. Thanks for reminding me, she laughed. But I couldn't leave you out in this. I'm Cat, by the way. Nice to meet you, Cat. I'm Mr. Binks. She let out a little laugh. I feel like I'm back at school. Do you have a first name, Mr. Binks? He shook his head. No, Ethan never gave me a first name. She briefly turned to him with a confused expression. What did you say? Ethan. He only ever referred to me as Mr. Binks. She didn't say anything, but I could feel how uncomfortable she was. I was screaming inside. Is everything okay, Cat? He asked. Yes, I'm fine, she said. I just remembered I'll be turning off at the next junction. Perhaps I should let you out now? Oh, that won't be necessary. In fact, I can see the lights. We're almost there. He pointed. There were some lights in the distance getting closer. Those lights? She asked. I don't understand. He laughed. Yes, dreams don't always make sense, do they? As the lights grew brighter, it became clear that they belonged to a large vehicle heading in our direction. Mr. Binks turned to me and smiled. Here will do fine, he said. Then he leant over and forced the steering wheel into the opposite lane. A horn sounded out as Cat screamed. The lights were blinding. Cat. I screamed as I sat up. Mom came running into the living room. You're fine, Ethan, you were just dreaming. The room was filled with natural light. I picked up my phone to see it had gone 11. There were missed calls and voice messages. Why didn't you wake me? I asked. You needed the rest, sweetheart, she said. I'll fix you a late breakfast. Mom left and I tried calling Cat. It went straight to voicemail. There were also missed calls from her parents and an unknown number. I felt sick. The first voice message was from Cat. I just got your message and I'm worried. I'm coming home, okay, baby? I'll try you again when I stop for gas. My hands shook as I listened to the next message. It was Cat's dad. Ethan. Oh God, Cat has been in an accident. Where at? I drove for almost 8 hours nonstop to a hospital in Connecticut. Cat's mom gave me a hug and cried. Her dad squeezed my arm. She's fine, he said. She's just sleeping right now. I spent the night by her side. If it wasn't for a small cut on her forehead, you wouldn't have known she was in a crash at all. She just looked like she was sleeping peacefully. Her car was totaled. It's a miracle she survived with minimal injuries. We were back home within a few days. When I asked her about the crash, she said it was mostly a blur, and she couldn't remember much after leaving her parents' house. I couldn't stop thinking about the dream but forced myself to stay rational. Kat asked me about the late-night message I'd left her and I glossed over it, saying I just had a bad dream and wanted to talk. I didn't want her to know about the show I'd seen just yet. I'd made a mental note to contact Dr. Magger when I felt brave enough. I'm sorry, I said. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have. Stop, she said. It's no one's fault, Ethan. It's just one of those things, okay? Another few days passed and some personal effects that were salvaged from the wreckage were delivered to our apartment. Kat's suitcase was included and looked pretty intact considering. Thank God, she said. I took some of Grandma's jewelry. Everything else was replaceable. She went to the bedroom to unpack and I went to the kitchen to make us sandwiches. Within a few minutes I heard her laughing from down the hall. What's so funny? I called out. One of my dad's ugly sweaters somehow got into my suitcase, she said. No way. I chuckled as I sliced tomatoes. That's hilarious. Unless it's yours, she asked from the kitchen doorway. But it's not really your style. I dropped the knife as she held up a green argyle sweater vest. "5 a.m. Time to go. Clouds loom overhead, the only excitement in a day as uneventful as any. The same sights and the same cars, the same people. Do they feel this way too? Do they feel the depressing sameness that wears on me? I don't know, I don't talk to people much. A light drizzle falls from the sky as I turn into my driveway. The wind is subtle and quiet. I'm greeted with the familiar, dull monotony of home. A quick shower washes the filth of boredom from my skin, replacing it with a film of sweat from the hot steam. I get off work at the same time every day. I'll go to bed at the same time tonight so I can wake up at the same time tomorrow. I eat the same small rotation of foods for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I flick on the same TV shows with the old remote, scrolling through a list of uninteresting programs and shows I've seen before. As mundane as life in the valley could be, everyone tensed up when it rained. A mixture of local legend and conspiracy theories will do that. People tend to go missing in their homes. That's not particularly interesting on its own, but the homes would always end up on the market suspiciously fast as unmarked vans would arrive, men with odd cleaning supplies go inside and then they leave. Police refuse to comment on any disappearances. This gave birth to a bevy of myths and legends. Alien abductions, some kind of government eugenics program, human trafficking, etc. While I don't believe the outlandish theories, I can admit I get nervous when a storm passes through. People don't disappear every time, but just often enough that people notice. When it rains it pours, I guess. The evening sky, hidden above the overcast cloud, makes it feel like the night has fallen early. Giving into my anxiety, I check the news. A large map on screen under siege by a variety of colors, moving in a systematic path. It's gonna be a rough one tonight, folks. Expect heavy winds and low visibility. We expect flash floods throughout the night. Stay inside and stay safe, everyone, the weatherman says. I guess it's better to be prepared, I think to myself. I open the basement door and flick the switch, going downstairs to find a lamp and some kerosene. I toss a lighter into my pocket, gather up some matches and candles and make my way back upstairs. Nothing crazy, but I'd rather not stub my toe in the dark. A low groan from my abdomen lets me know I should probably get dinner made while the lights are still on. Every day it's either frozen pizza, some type of pasta, or a poorly rolled burrito if not takeout. I decide to throw a pizza in the oven and sit down to watch something. I scroll through every streaming service but nothing catches my eye. The pizza is finished, at least. I run upstairs to my bedroom and open a window just a crack, just enough to let the smell in but keep the water out. I've always loved the smell of rain, and by this point, the lovely little tap 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 was starting to make its rounds. A cool bedroom with the smell of rain would help me sleep like a baby tonight. After eating my dinner and doing the dishes, the lights finally began to flicker. I light the lamp and a few candles and decide to do some reading on the couch. The pitter-patter of rain on the windows a relaxing backing track to the evening. A bright flash fills the house with light, the power finally giving out as the wind picks up, the rain a sharp blade against the roof, stabbing relentlessly as it pelts down. Thunder bellowed soon after. For a breath, the storm calms. Things were about to get a lot worse. I think I'd better go close the upstairs window. In the calm before the storm, the tap 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 comes back. Relaxing wind and the rain a gentle weeping from the sky. I'm about to make my way upstairs when I hear the tap 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 again, this time more deliberate. Less the sound of rain hitting the walls and more like someone knocking on the door. It came from the kitchen window. I grab the lamp and make my way to the window, peering outside. Nothing but the gray and green and black of night in the wooded suburb. Then I hear it again, this time at the front window, an urgent tap tap tap, my heart leaping from my chest. It sounded like nails hitting glass. Once again though, nothing is there. Was hail part of the forecast? Bang, bang, bang. A loud knocking comes from overhead like something is on the roof now. I clutch the lamp and now the anxiety is back. The storm began to pick up again, the sky screaming as the maelstrom rages. The blinding flashes of light, the deafening crack of thunder, and the loud howling of the wind devours the night around me. Despite everything, I hear a distinct drip, drip, drip coming from upstairs. Remembering the window, I ran to my bedroom to close the window, noticing a trail of dark, thick liquid flowing at the base of the window. Great, I thought. I studied the window for a moment, noticing the large gap, a gaping maw allowing rain to infiltrate the house. I'd left it cracked, just enough for a breeze and the scent to come in. Had I left it open like this? Ignoring my anxiety, I closed the window. The room is shrouded in black, like the light from outside had completely disappeared. The squelch of water below my feet snaps me out of my bewilderment, and I run to grab a mop, noticing the trail of water becoming sporadic at points, but it had a distinct spacing, like footsteps. I forget the mop and follow the footsteps, leading into a spare room, the door ajar. The door squeals as it opens, the creaking adding an unnecessary tension as the room was pitch black already. Inside the room smells something foul like mold and rot. I raise the lamp into the room and see a shadow in the corner, tall and twisting. Then a bright flash of lighting paints the walls with light and I can see it fully. It's tall, thin and twisted, almost swirling. Long sharp teeth fill out a horrific smile, twisting downwards on one side, upwards on another. Spindly fingers ending in long chipped nails. Uneven limbs marked by compounding joints, bones breaking through its green flesh, a slow oozing fluid slipping between the cracks. It stared at me with eyes that were nothing close to level. Looking at it made my brain hurt, a splitting headache as my mind tried to comprehend how its joints could possibly function, how it could exist when the air around it seemed to bend. An electricity in the air, coming with that stench of mold and death, filling up my nostrils and my mouth, coating my taste buds with a horrific sensation, numbing and foul. I breathed in the air around me unwillingly, as death itself coated my throat and lungs, dense and heavy, like I am standing on the bottom of the sea. I try to scream, to will any sound to escape from me, to remind me that I exist. I feel a pull into the swirling vortex of a creature. No sound can escape. A shriek fills the air, however it doesn't come from me. The creature's mouth stretched in seemingly infinite directions, as a scream escaped it, reflecting off of every wall, the floor, and the ceiling. It feels as if the sound itself has weight, echoing, then the echoes echoing further, screams pinging off of one another in an infinite loop. I lower my lantern, preparing myself to throw the fire at it, but a tendril protrudes from the creature's arm, hitting me in the chest as I fall back into the hallway, the wind knocked out of me and reality swimming back into focus. The lamp escaped my grip and shattered against the ground. The globe shattered around the flame as it was snuffed out by the water on the floor. I struggle to my feet, an ache in my right ankle, limping down the stairs trying to keep my balance as gravity pulls me down. The creature lets out another shriek as I hear loud footsteps coming from all around me. Blinded by both fear and the darkness of the house, no light filtering in from outside, I ran to the bathroom, unwilling to fumble with the chain and deadbolt of the front door in the blackness with an impossible monster on the hunt. I barricade the bathroom door with a small table and lock the door, my eyes searching for the window. The window is nowhere to be seen. Pure suffocating darkness surrounds me as I try to catch my breath. I must have fallen asleep on the couch. This is a nightmare, I think, trying to convince myself. No calm was washing over me, though. The panic maintains its hold on my heart and lungs. I pull the lighter from my pocket, a small radius of light finally helping to calm my nerves, coating the walls in a dark flickering yellow, the shadows dancing. Finally spotting the window, I try to open it, but it won't budge. I couldn't even feel it. It was as if the window wasn't there, a decoration placed behind a toilet, mocking me with the hope of safety. I can't hear the rain or the wind anymore. Just the silence, interrupted only by the occasional drip of fluids from the creature's shredded flesh, and my own heart, pounding in my ears. Across the house I hear another shriek bouncing off the walls, followed by the loud crack of splintering wood from what I assume is my laundry room door. Another shriek, this time followed by the bellowing of metal slamming into metal, as the creature ripped the washing machine from the walls, throwing it into the dryer, mimicking the sound of war drums. Silence once again. I hold my breath, trying to stay silent myself. It's gently racking its nails on the bathroom door, the air becoming heavy once again. I can hear a low snarl on the other side of the door. I turn off the lighter and hide in the linen closet, holding my breath and begging my heart to stop beating so loudly. Oh. The door flies off the hinges straight into the wall, the table exploding on the toilet. A large rectangular shape, twisting one way at the bottom and another at the top, is imprinted on the back wall where the window used to be. The creature steps into the room, treading slowly, snarling with a low groan. I can hear something else coming from the creature as well. Something fearful and shrill, like a group of people screaming in terror, though quiet, and I can't be sure where it was coming from. It seemed to just exist, filling up the quiet room in the background. More fluid drips from the creature, hitting the ground with a squelching splat every time. I try to sneak out as the creature searches the back of the room, never more thankful to have such a large bathroom. The door betrays me, however, emitting a long squeal as metal rubs against metal. The creature turns around, a sick grin washing over its face. I fling the door open and run into the living room, slipping on the fluid and falling again. The creature may as well have been 100 feet tall from where I lay on the ground. I can feel it pulling me into itself, the air circling around me. Struggling to my feet, I pull out the lighter once again. It's all I have to defend myself with. I plant my feet and hold the lighter at arm's length in front of me, hoping the flame will be enough to scare it away. Another tendril flies from the creature's arm, a joint breaking with a loud crack, and an explosion of the dark fluid. It strikes me in the ribs, almost certainly breaking one. I drop the lighter, moving my hands to protect my broken bone, my eyes closing as I bend inward and let out a long groan, still refusing to lose my footing. Another shriek fills the air, piercing my ears as a chorus of screams follow. In an instant the room became hot. The darkness gone, there were flames everywhere, the creature's footsteps. The trails of muck and water were alight, all stemming from the lighter, which landed in the pool below the creature's tendril, which had also caught. Sticky strands of thick ooze had fallen from the new limb, landing in the pool of fluids. The creature's screams continued as it stepped back. Using its good arm, it grabbed the long tentacle and broke it downward, as another loud crack filled the room, followed by a long rip as it tore the appendage away. It then grabbed the other it came from and broke the bones with yet another sickening crack, removing the remaining section of limb, leaving a new stub of bone to match the rest. As the creature tore itself apart, my boring and dull home burned around me, a blazing inferno. A culmination of years of monotonous and boring work, lost in an instant as an impossible creature. Something otherworldly pierced my ears with more deafening cries, while wails of the damned carried on. In the light of the fire I found the door, unlatched the chain, twisted the deadbolt and prayed the door would open. It did. The creature stalled behind me, stalking the room, trying to find a way around the wall of flame that separated us. I grabbed my keys, resting on a nail next to the door, and ran, got into the car and felt it rumble to life. This car carried me through countless days of the mundane life I now missed dearly, but it was my escape from the alien hell I'd found myself in. As I backed out, I could see the creature slithering out of the upstairs bedroom window, winding its way to the roof. It stared at me, its mouth open, surely screaming at me again. I raced down the empty road, no neighbors anywhere near, just the quiet edge of a lonely suburb, the final layer of a city in the valley. The shrieks grew quieter the further away I sped, the storm raging on. I'm currently in a hotel. I placed as much distance between myself and the creature as I could before calling 911, hoping the rain would hinder the fire before it had a chance to spread. I received a call from an unknown number shortly after. Exhausted, I ignored it, ready for sleep and the nightmares that would be waiting for me. As I closed my eyes, I heard two things. My phone vibrating again, the light filling up the room with a single message from an unknown number. You're in danger. And you distant sound of a steady. I never thought I'd see Jessica Wright again. We were just kids, really, high school seniors wrapped up in the small dramas of our tiny town. Jessica was the girl everyone noticed, with her bright eyes and infectious laugh. I was the boy in the back of the class, quietly sketching her from a distance, too shy to ever make a move. Our paths crossed occasionally, but we were never more than casual acquaintances. Then the accident happened. It was a rainy night, the kind that turns the roads into slick death traps. Jessica's car skidded off the highway and wrapped around a tree. She was gone before the paramedics even arrived. The town mourned, her parents were devastated, and for weeks I couldn't get her face out of my mind. I felt an unbearable guilt, a sense of loss that I couldn't explain. I didn't know her well, but somehow her death carved a hole in my life. Years passed. I moved away, went to college, got a job, and tried to forget the haunting memory of Jessica. Life became a series of routines, and for a while it worked. But then, a few months ago, the nightmare started. I would wake up drenched in sweat, Jessica's face floating just behind my eyelids, her eyes empty and accusing. It wasn't until last week that things took a turn for the worse. I was sitting alone in my living room, the clock on the wall ticking loudly in the silence. It was just after midnight, the hour when the world feels the most still. I had just turned off the TV and was about to head to bed when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin prickled and I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room. At first I saw nothing. Just the familiar contours of my furniture, the soft glow of the street light filtering through the curtains. But then, in the corner of the room, something shifted. My heart stopped. There she was, Jessica Wright, sitting in the old armchair by the window. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were black pits, void of any life. She was dressed in the same clothes she wore the day she died, soaked and torn. I blinked, hoping she would vanish, but she remained, staring at me with those empty eyes. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew it was her. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed with fear, as she continued to stare. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stood up. Her movements were slow and jerky, like a puppet on strings. She took a step towards me, and I could hear the squelch of her wet shoes on the carpet. I bolted upright and stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over the coffee table. She stopped, her head tilting to the side as if confused by my reaction. Then she took another step. And another. She was coming for me. In a blind panic, I fled to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I locked it, the metallic click echoing in the silence. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. Just silence. I spent the rest of the night huddled on my bed, every creak and groan of the house sending chills down my spine. When the first light of dawn finally crept through the window, I dared to open the door. The living room was empty, the armchair vacant. It was as if she had never been there. But I knew better. The next night she came again. And the night after that. Always at the same time, always sitting in that same chair, staring at me with those hollow eyes. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My life became a blur of fear and exhaustion. I couldn't escape her, couldn't understand why she was haunting me. Desperate for answers, I reached out to an old friend from high school, Sarah, who had been close to Jessica. She was skeptical at first, but when I described the apparition in detail, her voice trembled. She admitted that she, too, had been having nightmares about Jessica, dreams so vivid they felt real. We decided to meet and try to figure out what was happening. Sarah suggested we visit Jessica's grave, thinking it might bring us some closure. That evening, we drove to the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As we approached Jessica's grave, a chill settled over us. The headstone was simple, adorned with fresh flowers. We stood in silence for a while, lost in our thoughts. Then Sarah spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. I never told anyone this, but the night Jessica died, we had a huge fight. I said some terrible things, things I can never take back. I think she's trying to tell us something, to make us understand. I nodded, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. I realized that I, too, had unresolved feelings. Regret for never telling Jessica how I felt, for never getting to know her better. Maybe that's why she was haunting me, why she couldn't move on. We decided to hold a small ceremony, a way to say goodbye and ask for her forgiveness. As we lit candles and spoke our apologies, a strange sense of peace settled over the graveyard. I felt a presence, a warmth that hadn't been there before. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Jessica didn't visit me, and when I woke up, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I hoped that we had finally given her the closure she needed. But my relief was short-lived. A few nights later, the nightmares returned, more vivid and terrifying than before. Jessica wasn't just sitting in the chair anymore. She was moving, coming closer, her eyes burning with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I could hear her voice now, a faint whisper that grew louder each night. "Help me." I knew then that something was horribly wrong. Jessica wasn't at peace. She was trapped, and somehow I was the key to her release. I delved into old town records, searching for anything that might explain her restless spirit. What I found chilled me to the bone. The night of Jessica's accident, she hadn't been alone. There was another car, another driver who had fled the scene. The police had never found the culprit, and the case went cold. Jessica's death was more than just a tragic accident. It was a murder. I shared my findings with Sarah, and together we dug deeper. We uncovered a name, someone who had a history of reckless driving and a known grudge against Jessica. Confronting him was our only option. We tracked him down, a shadow of his former self, living in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. When we confronted him with the evidence, he broke down, confessing to everything. He had been drunk, angry, and when he saw Jessica on the road that night, he lost control. He had been haunted by guilt ever since, but fear kept him from coming forward. We persuaded him to turn himself in, to finally face justice. The relief in his eyes was palpable, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. That night, as I sat in my living room, I felt a shift in the air. The clock struck midnight, and for the first time in weeks, Jessica didn't appear. Instead, I felt a warmth, a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. I knew then that we had done the right thing, that Jessica could finally rest. But as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed darker, the silence heavier. As I lay down, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Thank you." I closed my eyes, hoping for a dreamless sleep. But deep down, I knew that some ghosts never truly leave us. They linger, waiting for the right moment to remind us of the past, of the things we can never change. And in the dead of night, when the world is silent and still, I can still feel Jessica's presence, watching over me, a reminder of the love I never had the courage to confess, and the girl who will forever haunt my dreams. When I was maybe 8 or 9, I had one of those nights where I just couldn't sleep. The room was a little too hot, and I'd spent the whole day inside eating popsicles and watching TV. Now, there was this weird buzzing in my ears, and my whole body felt twitchy, like it was punishing me for spending the day on the couch. Worst of all was my pillow. It had never been this lumpy before. The case had gotten sweaty right away, and then it was like immediately wet again after I turned it over. No matter how much I tossed and turned, I just couldn't get comfortable. Finally, I got up and walked downstairs where my dad was watching baseball. Seeing me, he muted it and asked if I needed anything. I shrugged. "My pillow sucks. That's all." He nodded, then he got this weird smile and said, "Maybe it's Mr. Pillow. First, you kind of need to know that my dad is a total goofball. My mom had left when my sister Madison and I were little, but he had stepped up in a big way, loving us double. He was always the one to tell us stupid ghost stories on camping trips about demon-possessed deer or bears who loved the smell of girls' shampoo. And then of course he'd come rattle the tent in the middle of the night and scare us out of our minds. "I'm just going to get some water and then head back to bed," I said. I looked over at the TV. The Brewers were losing by like 8 runs, so maybe he was trying to distract himself. "He was a real creep," said my dad, ignoring me. Of course, he wasn't called the Mr. Pillow back then. I think his name was Douglas something. Loved sneaking into kids' rooms and then strangling them to death. "Thanks for that," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. "That's definitely going to help me sleep." "Of course they caught him eventually," said my dad. "Big trial and everything. But before he ever got convicted, his cellmate suffocated him to death with a pillow." "Got it," I said. I turned to the fridge and found some leftover pizza. Then I carefully started picking off the pepperoni as my dad continued. "The weird thing came the next night," said my dad. "They found the cellmate dead too. Suffocated. Except there'd been no one in the cell to do the deed. Now I know what you're thinking, it was probably the guards, right? Maybe. But then other people started dying. Other prisoners who'd messed Douglas. All suffocated in their beds. That's when they started calling him Mr. Pillow." "Oh," I said. "So spooky." "And then kids in the neighborhood near the prison started dying too," said my dad. "Their moms would come in and find them dead in their beds. And the only thing linking the deaths was that some of the kids had mentioned being uncomfortable in their beds the night before, asking if their parents had switched out the pillows or anything." "Dad," I said, "this is the dumbest thing ever. Just stop." "And then in the morning they'd find the kids' old pillows stashed away somewhere, and on the bed there'd be no pillow at all. Like it had just disappeared." I didn't even acknowledge that last part. I just hit the bathroom and walked up to bed. Soon enough, I heard the sounds of the baseball game come back on the TV as my dad unmuted it. Then as I approached my room, I swore I heard footsteps and the creak of a window. I walked inside and looked at my bed. And I'm not fucking kidding, there was no pillow on my bed. The window was open a crack and I ran over to it. It was dark and rainy outside and I didn't see anyone out there. Finally, I closed the window, making sure it was locked tight. My heart was beating about 1,000 beats a minute now. I walked over to my closet and opened it. Inside, I saw my usual pillow sitting on the floor. I screamed and ran downstairs as fast as I could. "Dad!" I shouted. He turned the game off right away and ran over to me. I tried to explain about the window, the pillow, everything. "It was just a stupid story, right?" I asked. "The stupidest." My dad nodded. "I just made it up," he said. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have scared you. Mr. Pillow? Really? I thought you were old enough and it wouldn't freak you out." The whole time he was talking though, he looked kind of nervous. Suddenly his eyes went wide. "Wait here on the couch," he said. "I'd better run up and check on Maddie." I'd never seen my dad run so fast. He pounded up the stairs 2 at a time. And the whole time he was gone, I imagined my little sister dead, or dying, screaming for her life as the soft pillow wrapped around her face, choking the life out of her. I couldn't believe I'd run downstairs without checking on her first. A few seconds later, he came down, my sleeping sister in his arms. "I was thinking it might be a fun night for us all to cuddle up on the couch," he said. "What do you think?" My dad never mentioned Mr. Pillow again after that. But of course he didn't have to. Even now that I'm in my 30s, I still double-check the inside label of my pillow every night before I go to sleep, making sure it's the usual one. Every once in a while, I still hear about some kid in my town dying overnight. Of course, I have my theory about what happened, but I figure there's no point in sharing it. Who would ever believe a story as stupid as Mr. Pillow, right? I'm sorry. I know how this all sounds. I just wanted to share it in case it helps someone else out there. Before you go to bed tonight, just check inside your pillowcase. Make sure you recognize the label inside. It just might save your life. I knew that going to the laundromat at 2 a.m. was a bad idea, but I didn't have a choice. In less than 6 hours I had to be at work, and I still hadn't eaten dinner. The half-unpacked remains of my move lay scattered around the cramped studio apartment. And that was how disaster struck. In slow motion, I watched it happen. My neatly pressed work uniform hanging from a chair in the kitchen, the boiling pot of pasta and the open jar of tomato sauce beside it. My fluffy golden cat, Waffles, gently nudging the jar toward the end of the counter with a single sadistic paw. Waffles and all. I shouted. Too late. The jar shattered on the floor. The kitchen and my work uniform now looked like movie props from an 80s slasher flick. Waffles, his eyes wide as though the chaos had been caused by some other cat, scurried off to hide under the bed. I hung my head and turned the spaghetti pot off. Everything else that had happened to me lately, and now this. I was starting a new job and living out of suitcases on the seedy side of town because of a messy breakup with my ex-boyfriend, Nate, just 3 days before. I was starting over from nothing and I really needed this job. I couldn't afford to show up covered in tomato sauce stains on my first day. Cursing, I stuffed the crimson-splattered clothing into a laundry bag and trudged downstairs. It had just stopped raining. The late-night streets were completely deserted. I didn't know the neighborhood well at all, but I remembered seeing a 24-hour laundromat just 2 blocks up from my dingy apartment building. Sure enough, I could see the reflection of its neon sign on the rain-slicked streets ahead. I took a deep breath. Maybe things would be okay after all. Hitching the bag higher on my shoulder, I headed toward the laundromat's glow. The cool night air felt good on my skin. Change rattled cheerfully in my pocket. So why was I so nervous? It might have been the neighborhood, which had a reputation for danger, especially for women and especially at night. My friends had practically staged an intervention when I'd told them where I was moving, but the truth was that I didn't have a choice. I'd needed a place with cheap rent where the landlords didn't ask too many questions, and this was it. By coming here, I'd put half the city between me and my ex. And at the time, that was all I'd cared about. Was it just the sinister memories of news articles that I'd read about those seamy streets that had me so on edge? Or was it something more? Every instinct screamed danger, but I couldn't see its source in the lightless windows around me. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, but every time I turned around the inky black streets seemed empty. I pushed open the door to the laundromat. Something clanged above me, bringing a scream to my throat, but when I looked up I couldn't help but laugh. It was just the jingle of the bell above the door. The laundromat was bright, modern, and surprisingly clean. Industrial-strength washers and dryers lined the walls. Beside the door was a row of plastic seats, an out-of-order vending machine, and a small table stacked high with outdated newspapers and magazines. I had just inserted my coins and started the wash cycle when the bell above the door sounded for a second time. My blood ran cold. Before I could turn around, a harsh masculine voice spoke right behind me. "Looks like you murdered someone." "What?" I spun, wondering how the lanky figure had crossed the room so quickly. The awareness that he stood between me and the door made my heart beat a little faster. "Your clothes. The red stains. Who'd you kill?" His mouth twisted into a yellow jack-o'-lantern grin as he repeated his ghastly joke. He was too close, way too close. My nose was practically touching his chest. He gave off a foul odor like rot in dark places. Black dirt was caked beneath his fingernails. For some reason, that tiny observation was what terrified me most of all. What was this guy doing in a laundromat at 2:30 a.m.? And why didn't he have any clothes to wash? "It's spaghetti sauce," I murmured finally and tried to pass by him. "Well, not so fast." The man deftly blocked my path. "Are you seriously going to act like you don't remember me?" I took him in, ripped jeans, paint-splattered black t-shirt, gangly arms covered with what looked like track marks, tangled, greasy black hair. I'd never seen him before in my life. The door of the laundromat felt hopelessly far away. "I think you have me confused with someone else." I tried to sidestep again, but he was just too quick. "Seriously?" he repeated, sounding almost disappointed. "The name Samuel doesn't ring any bells, huh? Look, I don't know you and you're standing in my way." I hated how scared and shrill my own voice sounded. I'm leaving now, so? I'm afraid I can't let you do that. Only then did I notice the knife glinting in Samuel's hand. My eyes darted to the black windows, the empty streets outside. There was no one to save me, no one to call to for help. I shut my eyes tight. If only I hadn't left that jar of pasta on the edge of the counter. If only I'd hung my work uniform up somewhere else. Everything could have been different. My bad decisions marched through my mind one after another like a grim parade. Running away from my ex without a solid plan. Moving to a dangerous neighborhood out of desperation. Not just trying to wash out the damn stain at home. I blinked. Samuel hadn't stabbed me, grabbed me, or hurt me yet. I suppose you're wondering what I'm doing here, my hostage taker mused. The only thing I was wondering was how to either get his knife or get away from him, but I kept my mouth shut and let him talk. I'd read somewhere that it was a bad move to interrupt a psychopath's monologue, and that certainly seemed to be the case here. But I could ask you the same thing, couldn't I? Samuel rambled on. Why are you in a laundromat at 2:30 a.m.? And I don't just mean the tomato sauce stains. I really want you to ask yourself, what are you doing here? The question caught me off guard, and my eyes drifted once again to the knife. I could imagine all too clearly the gruesome possibilities of what might happen if Samuel didn't like my response. You don't have to answer out loud if you don't want to. Just think about it. Now, why don't you have a seat? It's going to be a while before that uniform gets clean, B. I was halfway to the chairs when I realized with shock what Samuel had called me. Back in elementary school, B had been my nickname, a tribute to the first letter of my real name, and to my obsession with a certain pollinating insect. But no one had called me that in years. Who was this guy? Don't try anything stupid, Samuel informed me as he took a seat between me and the exit. I don't want you to get hurt. It was an odd way of phrasing things, considering he was the one with the knife. Once he'd said his piece, however, Samuel leaned back in the plastic chair, as still and silent as a corpse. With nothing better to do while my laundry spun and Samuel stared blankly into space, I ruminated on my kidnapper's question. What was I doing here, really? It had started with something simple, a fight over nothing. My boyfriend Nate and I had been arguing about whose turn it was to wash the dishes when he suddenly slapped me with the back of his hand. For a moment I was stunned. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Even harder to believe was the savage look of victory and satisfaction on his face. Nate had always been so calm and gentle. Of all the people I'd dated, I'd never once imagined that he would be the one who hit me. But I wasn't going to stand for it. My mother had had an abusive partner for almost a year when I was a child, and after seeing what she'd gone through, I'd sworn to myself that the moment a romantic partner lifted a hand against me, it was over. I'd started packing right away, completely deaf to my boyfriend's apologies and pleas. He hadn't meant it, and he was sorry, and it would never happen again. Listening to him, I'd had the eerie sensation that my mom's ex-partner was speaking through his lips, as though he were a medium channeling that awful man's ghost. The impact of his knuckles was still burning on my cheek when I climbed into the idling taxi. I had nothing in the world except 4 suitcases, a small savings account, and my cat Waffles purring in my lap. I went no contact, blocking Nate's number and refusing to speak to him again, even after I realized that I'd forgotten my laptop at his place. As far as I was concerned, he could have it, along with anything else I'd left behind. It was the price I paid for freedom. Tears welled up in my eyes as I glanced at the grim figure in the seat beside me, with his hollow-eyed stare and razor-sharp hunting knife. How had my life come to this? Had I been too stubborn, too headstrong? I hadn't wanted to ask anyone for help, not even my family and friends. I'd been too embarrassed by how badly I'd misjudged Nate. If I was honest with myself, that was the true answer to my captor's question. My own reckless choices were what had led me to a 24-hour laundromat on a savage side of town in the early hours of the morning. I hung my head. Far across the tile floor, the washing machine beeped and Samuel's filthy fingers squeezed my shoulder. I winced. His grip was cold and hard. Your laundry's done, B. As I carried my damp uniform to the dryer, I wondered what time it was. 3:30? 4. In a few hours the sky would begin to brighten. There would be people on the streets again, and I'd finally have a chance to get away from this psycho, if I lived that long. With a shiver, I realized that Samuel had to be just as aware of the passage of time as I was. Whatever he had planned for me, it was going to happen soon. Maybe even as soon as the dry cycle was finished. Yet Samuel just stared dead ahead, the knife resting readily on the thigh of his jeans, that same crooked half-smile on his gaunt face. He was as still as a cobra waiting to strike. Not even his expression had changed. We watched my clothing spin in silence. When the machine finally beeped, the shock of it made me jump in my chair. This was it. Trying not to look at my captor or his weapon, I loaded my still warm uniform into my laundry bag and headed for the door. If I didn't say anything, if I acted like all this was normal, maybe he'd let me go. As if in a dream, I felt the door handle in my hand and heard the jingle of the bell overhead as I pushed it. Samuel still hadn't moved. "Take care of yourself, B," was all he said as I walked out the door. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to kiss the filthy, uneven sidewalk beneath my feet. The nightmare was over. I was almost to my apartment when I heard sprinting footsteps charging toward me. Of course it had been too good to be true. I knew that I should run, but I froze instead, eyes shut tight, waiting for the inevitable blow. It never came. Instead, I heard a faint gasp and the dull thud of something heavy hitting the pavement. When I finally dared to turn around, I saw Nate lying in a puddle of blood. A garrote wire was tangled in his hands. His face was twisted into an expression of mindless hate. Of Samuel, there wasn't a trace, apart from the hunting knife buried up to the hilt in Nate's chest. It took me days to recover, and days more to piece together what had happened. Although I'd changed my passwords after leaving Nate, I hadn't considered that my phone tracking app was still open on the laptop I'd left behind. It could be used to find my phone, to find me. That part of the night at least made sense. But who was Samuel? Where had he come from? How had he seemed to know me so well? Against my better judgment, I returned to the laundromat at 2:30 a.m. the next night. I couldn't have said why. Maybe I wanted to thank Samuel, or maybe I just needed to confirm for myself that he'd even been real. The police had cleared me of any involvement in Nate's death, but so many unanswered questions still swirled around me. I wanted closure. I wanted to know what had really happened that night. I hardly dared to breathe as I peered in the window of the 24-hour laundromat, only to find it empty. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or disappointed. Retracing my steps, I searched for any clue about who Samuel had been. I found what I was looking for on the table of magazines in the laundromat. Flipping through a month-old newspaper, I found a small article caught my attention. Another local youth claimed by drugs. Read the title, followed by 2 photos. One showed a cleaner, smiling Samuel, and the other sent a flood of memories coursing through me. Sammy. The gap-toothed boy with the bowl cut who'd been my partner in crime back in 3rd grade. I hadn't thought of him in years, and I would never have imagined seeing him again in a place like this, under such bizarre circumstances. Sammy was Samuel. Addiction had clearly taken its toll on the boy I once knew, but the 2 photos were clearly the same person. According to the article, he'd died of a heroin overdose just a few blocks away from my new apartment. His body had been found over a month ago. But in that case, who, or what, had stabbed Nate? I didn't have an explanation then, I still don't. But every time I hear the bell of my local laundromat ring, I turn around, hoping to see a familiar face.